I want to give you some perfect, imperfect tips for hat knitting. So what I've done here is I've cast on a whole bunch of stitches, and I have cast on one more than is required for your pattern, and I'll show you why in a minute. And I also have knit my first row of ribbing, but you'll notice I haven't joined it yet. The first thing in hat making, it's always going to say cast on X number of stitches and then join, being careful not to twist. And if you're going to be doing, if you've only done one cast on row, it's very easy for your stitches to sort of twist like this, and then you don't notice the twist, and you've basically created a Mobius strip, and you cannot fix it. Maybe someone better than me can fix it, but I cannot fix it. I can just make it into a beautiful ball of yarn and start over. But what I'm saying here is don't join it. Just flip it over and start knitting the way you normally would, knitting flat, and knit your row of 1 by 1 ribbing. So here I've knit that through, and the reason that we do that is, like, you can see that when I knit and I have more than just one stitch on the needle, it just likes to, it goes around, but it doesn't want to twist. It just sort of lays flat. And if you really are concerned about it before you can even come close to joining it, after you've, let me show you. Okay. You can lay it down on the table and you can see how it just lays flat without twisting. So that's going to solve this very difficult problem of trying to keep one row of cast on stitches from flipping. The other thing that you can do, whenever I cast on anything, a sock, a hat, a glove, whatever, and it's joined together, this is how I join it. I cast down one more stitch than is called for, and it's, you know, on the other needle, and then I take the stitch before, so it would be here waiting. It's here. So here's all my stitches. It was cast on here. I had it just hanging out here, and then I'm going to move it to the other needle. So you just move the stitch away from the stitches it's on to the other needle. And in this sort of situation, it's very easy to do because it's already there. They just had a little space between it, so you just slide it together. And so when you go to do the next stitch, which is going to be the first stitch of your row, you just knit those two stitches together, the extra one plus the other one. And then you can go on with your ribbing. And your life is very easy at that point to go on. But I don't want to talk about ribbing. That's basically it. So what's going to happen is you're going to have an imperfection. Yes, you are. You're going to have one little part where you look really carefully. There's sort of a lack of joining here. But your very last step in your knitting is going to be to take this extra tail and weave it in. And you can just kind of weave this yarn in and you won't be able to see that imperfection in any way. But you've got two problems that are solved. One, your ring is not going to come apart in any way because the first beginning and end have already been joined together. And two, you're not going to have a chance that you've accidentally swapped these guys so that you have to go ahead and undo the whole thing and start over because your thing twisted. Ask me how I know. I was doing, I love to knit infinity scarves, and the infinity scarf had about 285 stitches to cast on, and I cast it on and I joined it in the round. Even though I knew this trick, I didn't follow it, and instead I decided to twist it, and I twisted that thing and I didn't notice it for about 10 rows when I started noticing that my nice ring was in fact never going to lie flat. And I had to put it in timeout, and then I had to undo it and start over because there is no way to fix it that I know. Maybe some professional like Patty Lyons or some fancy technical knitter could do it, but for me, the time to fix it was probably going to be more than the time it would take me just to cast it on again and do the knitting. And it, you know, the second time around when you knit, it's always better. It always looks better. I think so. That's something my Aunt Nancy says, so she's right about that. Anyway, I'm going to knit a whole bunch of stitches, and I'm just doing this because I want to show you color work. And color work, as a rule, is not generally done in ribbing. And I want to have a nice line of blue, so I'm chatting as I do it. You can watch me knit, which is, I'm sure, really fascinating. I am a thrower, and I do knit two-handed color work where I I pick, but I don't enjoy it, and I often will resort to just throwing with my right hand. If you watch me knit, you will notice that for reasons of my own, my thumb flies away from the needle every time I make a stitch, and I have tried hard not to do that, but it seems impossible. I don't know if it's some kind of reflex or weirdness, but that's just what my thumb wants to do. But you don't really need to touch this needle. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. So here we go. We're back to the beginning. We got a lot of lovely stitches here. So there's a couple of things that I think are really neat tricks for color work. So let's say we're going to join in this beautiful orange yarn. And there's two different ways that you can do it. You just knit up to where you're supposed to join it, and you're supposed to have a new color start. And the way I usually do it is I take my little tail in my hand, I create a tiny bit of tension behind it, behind here, just by pulling it, and then I just pick it, and I just pull up that first one. Now I also like to tighten that second stitch just for fun. But the next thing I do that I think is another imperfect trick is you stick your needle into the next stitch, and instead of knitting it with just the working yarn, you're going to knit it with the yarn and the tail together. Now, why am I doing this? Because if you don't, you're going to have this loosey-goosey stitch that's really not connected to anything because you haven't woven in the ends yet. And so it's just sort of sitting there. And you have to keep coming back and just tightening it up by pulling this. And that's not a big deal. But if you just take your second stitch and you just knit them with the two yarns as one, and then you continue on knitting with the other yarn, you're not going to have that tension problem. It's just going to go away. Okay, so here's the problem. Technically, did I just create another stitch? Yes. And the next stitch, the next round I come around, I'm not going to separate these. I'm just going to treat it like one stitch and knit it as one stitch. And if you think you're going to mess up and just not remember to do that, then don't do this tip. But I've never done that by accident because they really do stick together. You have to pry them apart to make them go anywhere. And I think that nobody is going to notice this double stitch unless they are really looking at your knitting in a very picky and nasty way, and in which case they really don't deserve to look at your knitting, so I don't think you should let them. All right, so that's a cool trick. Another neat trick, I'm gonna do something crazy insane because I don't want to knit backward. I'm just going to cut this off. All right, so I'm going to knit some beautiful blue stitches here. I'm just cutting it off because I want to show you how to join the orange in a different way. So I just learned this trick from a book called The Sock Project, which is a cute little book. It's, in my opinion, for any level of sock knitter. You can even be a beginner and try that book. It's pretty good. So here is her little trick. She has you start about 6 stitches before you want your next color. And then you don't join the yarn and knit it. You just have it hanging out behind and drape over your finger like this. So now when you're going to, when the working yarn's going to come, instead of knitting it, you just let it, your needle go underneath this one. So it just grabs it from the back and pins it down. Now, if you are saying to me, I know what this is the exact same skill as you use for tying down floats and for intarsia. It's just a way of tacking the yarn without knitting it. But what she said, now see, look, I tacked mine too hard. Now, what do you do when you do that? You just go back and pull the back, and it disappears like magic. Okay, so the point of doing this is that when I get up here to do my little orange stitches, boom, it's already there, and there's not going to be any tension problems here. So there's that. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is if you're going to do 2-color knitting, some people will tell you, and I do this, to knit with your left hand one yarn and your right hand the other. So I'm going to pick with this side and I'm going to throw with this side, and that's great. But it can cause tension problems. So here's one of the problems. One of the problems is that if you're not a European knitter, which I am not, you are going to pull this too tight. And so when I'm doing this, if I start really squeezing my fingers, this yarn, I'm practically pulling it through like I'm pulling a splinter, you know, out of my hand. And what's going to happen is those stitches are going to look super tight. And then when I go to throw, those stitches are going to look loose, and it's going to become this sort of weird gaping thing, which, by the way, that usually will block out fine. But let's pretend we're not going to do that. So here's the thing you got to do. You got to put the yarn in your fingers. I do it like this, and then just don't care about it. And by that I mean it's going to be loose, and you're just going to let it lie there. It has some tension on it just from being with your fingers, but my fingers are really not touching the yarn. They're just an obstacle for the yarn. I've even seen some people knit it where they only pinch their back finger. And it does feel a little loosey-goosey. But when you do it, when you compare it with your other stitches, it's fine. So if you're finding that your tension is hard between this being super tight and this being super loose, my suggestion is to maybe do less fingers or up further, but just make sure you're not pulling it. It's loose like a piece of yarn draped, not like a thread tight for sewing. Okay, the last tip is this. If you enjoy throwing and you do not enjoy picking, or you just have to do a couple stitches, there's no sin in just dropping your yarn, pulling your other yarn up, and then knitting it. And if I have to go back and forth, what I will sometimes do is I just kind of keep both of the yarns in my hand like this, separated. I guess I have them around my middle finger. And so I choose with my index finger which one I'm knitting. So here, they're both there. So I want blue, I choose with my index finger. I want orange, I choose with my index finger. I want blue, I choose with my index finger. I just choose which one I want. So I want 3 oranges, 1, 2, 3. I want 3 blues, 1, 2, 3. This works really well if you're alternating between a short number of stitches and you don't have to secure any floats. Securing floats is so natural if you knit in both hands, but this works really well. And if I don't use my index finger, what I've even found myself doing just by accident is I will use my middle finger to wrap the yarn and my index finger to wrap the other color. See, I'm gonna do it slower. Oh, there we go. And then this one wraps the other color. And when I really want to make sure my tension's really good and my yarn is looking lovely, I'll do this. And I just think it's faster. I knit faster when I throw. So you have a lot of options, but there is no law, right? I took a class with Arne and Carlos, and they are Norwegian color knitters, right, obviously. And they told us just, you know, he just drops the yarn between. He doesn't knit with both hands. He picks every one and he just drops the color and picks up the next one. So some of us, we like our tips, but we kind of talk about them like they're law, and they're not. You can just do whatever it is that makes it easier for you to knit color. So I hope this was helpful. Thanks. Bye.